I wanted to address an issue that often isn't thought about. When we belong to a particular culture, obviously we inherit certain ideologies. And if we don't think about them deeply enough, we tend to project that onto other cultures, thinking that they think the same or their attitudes are the same. And therefore, this can lead to misunderstandings. But also, it can be fun, more interesting to understand how different people looked at these things. And so I'm taking the example today of ancient Greek culture, ancient Greek religion. You know, the Olympian gods, the Titans, Zeus, Minotaurs, Gorgons, all that stuff. And of course, people read about, well, there were these gods, the gods of Olympus, and they had temples and things, and people went there, and sometimes they had arguments called a Trojan War. But behind all of this is an automatic projection that somehow the Greeks liked their gods. Or for those of us brought up in a Christian tradition where to love God is a big thing, that they loved their gods, and nothing could be further from the truth. Why would I say such an outrageous thing? Well, it comes down to this. The gods, eventually the Olympian gods, the powers that be, ruled all of creation. Let's take Poseidon, or for the Romans, Neptune, as an example. God of the sea, but also god of earthquakes. The sea was a giver of bounty and harvest, but it was also of devastation. And of course, there was nothing nice about earthquakes. So why do the Greeks worship Poseidon? They build him temples. They give him priesthoods. They give him sacrifices. Why? Because it's rather like paying off the mafia. It's to keep him sweet so he won't crush humanity. And this applies to all of the Olympians. And don't get sentimental even about Aphrodite. She's one of the worst of the lot. At least the Greeks had the sense to recognise she was the result of violence and of murder, and didn't have an affectionate bone in her Olympian body. So the the gods are beings who have to be placated. Where did this ideology come from? Why did the Greeks have this view? It's in their own, I'm going to call them their own sacred teachings. Nowadays, of course, people say their legends, their mythologies, which is the way people talk down about other people's beliefs. For them, it was their living religion, their philosophy by which they lived, and which gave them their understanding of who and what they were and what the world was. So their legend tells it to us very clearly. At first, the Titans ruled the world, and then some of their offspring from their king, Kronos, or if you prefer the Latin, Saturn, they had a violent war that caused a lot of physical devastation, and eventually these grandchildren of the Titans become the Olympian gods. Some of the Titans were allowed to remain free, but the majority were confined to the underworld, to Tartarus, to stop them causing any more trouble. Now, one of the Olympians, of course, was the king of the gods, Zeus, Jupiter. And he became the king of the gods, and he ruled everything. And his two brothers, who were almost as strong as him, one was, I've mentioned him just now, Poseidon, Neptune. He gets given the sea. And the other one, Hades, or Pluto in Latin, he gets the underworld, whereas Zeus rules the upper world. Now, one of the Titans who was not condemned was somebody called Prometheus. And that's because he didn't side with the other Titans in the war against the gods. And because of this, he was allowed to get on with and do his own thing. Prometheus, the word actually means forethought. Not for as in the number, but for as before. Forethought, Prometheus. He was one of those inquisitive people who liked to look into things and make things. And he got some pieces of clay and he made these tiny little beings, you see. And they had, one head and 2 arms and 2 legs. That's right, just like me. And he made these beings and he was incredibly fond of them. And then he brought them to life. This was humanity. He was really pleased with these. And so he took them, probably in his arm or in a basket, to see Zeus, the king of the gods. And he proudly showed them to Zeus. Unfortunately, Zeus did not like them. He thought they were an infestation and they would spread like fleas. And if it hadn't been for the fact that, as he said, the cold of winter would kill them, he would have wiped them out himself. But he said the first winter will destroy them, take them away, which Prometheus did. But Prometheus was very fond of his creation. But he could see Zeus's point. These creatures, they didn't have fur to keep them warm. And they were vulnerable against the bigger creatures. What was he going to do? Then he came to the solution was what they needed was fire. Because then they could kindle fires that keep creatures away from the mouth of their caves and also keep themselves warm and in time learn to cook, etc. How to get fire? Prometheus hits on it because natural fire in most cases occurs due to lightning strikes. Thunderbolts that strike trees, burst of fire, and there you are. Who owned all the thunderbolts in the Olympian world? Yep, Zeus. God of the storm and the skies, thunderbolt. Rather like Vajra in Hindu mythology. Indra with his Vajra in Hindu mythology. Now, Prometheus knew this was risky. So what he did was he snuck into Olympus, stole one of the thunderbolts, comes down and gives them to humanity, the first fires, and thus humanity flourish. Well, after a while, Zeus notices that these humans are still carrying on. He also notices they have fire. And then he notices that one of his thunderbolts is missing. Zeus is not a happy god. And Olympian gods in particular have foul tempers when they're upset. They make Jehovah look like a pussycat. So Zeus punishes Prometheus. He has him chained by links to iron links of a chain to a mountain and condemns him to stay there for eternity. He swears by the river Styx he will never be released from the mountain. And then he orders a vulture to every day tear out with its beak and claws Prometheus's liver and eat it. During the night, the liver regrows, and the next day, the agony of being torn by the vulture continues. century after century after millennia after millennia after millennia. This is the price Prometheus pays for bringing humanity and preserving them. Now, after a long, long time, Zeus is feeling a bit bad about this. But he can't do anything because, as it said, to swear by the river Styx, which, by the way, is the river that flows to the underworld, is the vow that the gods themselves dare not break. And so Zeus knows he can't. Nobody's actually said why they can't break it. I have my own suspicion that because the Styx is the river of death, and the gods are deathless, the whole thing about the Styx and them is a kind of, let's keep a distance from this. But anyway, whatever the meaning for it is, Zeus couldn't do a thing about it, no matter how much he regretted it. After all, he had been very friendly with Prometheus. They were good company. Anyway, there's another hero wandering around the place, Hercules. You've all heard of Hercules. And of course, Hercules has his 12 labours. By the way, there's a whole magical teaching about the 12 labours being tied up with the signs of the zodiac. There's whole rituals and initiatory processes can be done with the Hercules figure, but we're not doing that today. Hercules is wandering around doing his labours. By the way, they weren't voluntary, they were forced on him. But Zeus calls Hercules to him and says, well, I see you're going to your next labour. You'll be going past that mountain that I've chained Prometheus onto. He said, I'd like you to release him. I can't do it myself, but you could. Hercules says, but you've sworn he won't be released, so that means by anybody. He said, yes, that's the technical wording of the vow, but I'm sure you'll think of something. Off you go. And so Hercules goes off. So to cut a long story short, Hercules gets to the mountain. There's Prometheus, big, tight, chained to this thing with his big, ravenous bird. So how the bird put up with a diet of liver non-stop for so many centuries, I'm not sure, but there we are. And so Hercules, first and foremost, he kills the vulture. Well, that's not part of the problem. But now he's still chained to the mountain. So he breaks the chain and takes one link of it out. He then chips off a tiny bit of stone from the mountain itself. And he puts it in between the two ends of the ring and joins them again. He then places that on Prometheus's forefinger. I'm never too sure whether that isn't a pun on what I've already told you, forethought. But for whatever reason, it goes on the forefinger. An iron band with a crude piece of stone. So Prometheus is now still chained to the mountain. Ta-da! And thus he's freed. So in the Greek world, and by carrying on the Roman world, though to a lesser extent, in Greek thinking, Prometheus is their creator and their saviour. Not the gods. The gods are a bunch of bullies. You just have to keep them sweet. But Prometheus is the father of mankind. And that is why, if ever you see the old statues and pictures of anybody who was of significance in Greek or Roman society, a king, a high priest, a general, anybody, they wear a ring on their forefinger. Rings of office were placed on the forefinger. As you may know, in some churches, particularly in the Roman Catholic Church, bishops and those, they wear rings of office. Originally, as you can see from the old pictures, they were also worn on the forefinger. Nowadays they tend to be worn on the third finger, but originally they were on there. And this was all done in memorial, in honour of Prometheus, the creator and saviour of humanity. So there's a different take on the story.